Hello everyone. In the previous lecture, we were familiarizing ourselves with the theory of rasa propounded by Bharata. We discussed Bharata's Rasa Sutra and familiarized ourselves with the aesthetic elements that Bharata considers responsible for the generation of rasa. What happened to rasa theory after Bharata? Did the theoreticians after Bharata take up the questions which Bharata left unanswered? Unfortunately, we need to answer this question in the negative. After Bharata's Nāṭyaśāstra, that is believed to have composed in the 3rd century, there is hardly anything substantial available on the discourse of rasa for some time. The next major text to talk something about the idea of rasa in the field of literary theory was Bhamaha's Kavyalangara in the 7th century. But in Kavyalangara, Bhamaha took the discussion of rasa to a much narrower direction that the scholars of literary theory could not ever expect. Instead of taking the discussion of Bharata forward, Bhamaha simply relegated the position of rasa to the realm of figures of speech. When we think about the treatment of the concept of rasa in the critical corpus of Bhamaha, we need to keep in mind that this is the first instance of the idea of rasa being extrapolated from Natya to Kavya. Pollock observes that precisely when and how the concept of rasa extended from drama to narrative poetry, from the seen to the heard and the read, and with what consequences for aesthetic theory, is something we need to puzzle out from our textual sources. According to the available historical evidence, Udbhaṭa is the sole author who explicitly declares his extrapolation of the theory of rasa from the domain of drama to poetry. He describes the difficulty that he faced in such a process and the consequences of it. Bhamaha subsumes the idea of rasa under 3 verbal expressions of emotions such as rasavat or rasa-laden, prayaha or affectionate utterance, and urjasvin or haughty declaration. As an example of affectionate utterance, Bhamaha cites the words of Vidura, the wise half-brother of Dhritarashtra and the well-wisher of the Pandavas, to Krishna. Scholars opine that the citation is from an unknown Mahabharata play and it possibly refers to Krishna's visit to the abode of Vidura. The verse that Bhamaha cites as an example of prayaha or affectionate utterance is as follows. The joy that I experienced today by your coming to my house, Govinda, I will have in the future only if you return. According to Bhamaha, a rasa-laden statement is one where emotion such as erotic is clearly shown, as in the following example. The queen appeared, no longer disguised as a religious mendicant. The example of the haughty declaration is Karna's words to Shalya when the snake arrow which he shot to kill Arjuna returned without accomplishing the mission. He asks, "Dear Shalya, does Karna shoot an arrow twice?" Like Bhamaha before him, Dandin also reserves no special category for rasa other than that of figuration. Pollock's observation is noteworthy in this context. He says that for Dandin, as for Bhamaha, rasa was native to dramaturgical discourse, where it was more fully explained. In poetry, by contrast, the only category available for its analysis was the figure of speech. It would take several more centuries for it to be conceived of as the dominant feature of the literary work. In fact, the singular feature that distinguished literature from all other forms of language use. In Dandin's Kavyadarsha, the idea of rasa is used in 3 different senses. First, as a general term for any deviant linguistic expression, and secondly, as a general term for any sweet poetic style. It should be noted that both the first and the second usage reflect the general conception that literary language needs to be different from the ordinary form of speech, and it is its defamiliarized form that appears enjoyable to the readers. Finally, Dandin considers rasa as a technical term for various instances of affective expressions such as Prayaha, Rasavat and Urjasvin. Although among these three categories only the second one, that is Rasavat, seems to have some connection with Rasa. All three are in fact clearly connected to the expression of an emotion, and this is clearly indicated by Dandin, who says all these three categories portray heightened feeling. It is also possible to think that Dandin sees Rasa as something that is residing in the character. This is evident from Dandin's treatment of the Rasa-laden statement, where he says that this drop of emotion specifically refers to the intensified emotion of the character. For him, aesthetic emotion resides in the character's direct discourse and never in the external descriptions. As we saw in the case of Bharata, we can say for certain that the idea of rasa as conceived by Dandin is internal to the work. It does not see rasa as the aesthetic response of the readers to a text. Now, let's once again turn our attention to the three ways in which Dandin understands the concept of rasa. As I told you before, Dandin first considers rasa as the essential quality of a poem to be sweet and mellifluous. In Kavyadarsha, Dandin says, a poem is defined as sweet when it has rasa. Rasa is found in both the language and the subject matter, and insightful people become intoxicated by it like bees by honey. The observation of Dandin's commentator Vadijankhala is particularly noteworthy here. He says that the author is distinguishing the language quality from what will later be defined as the ornament called the rasa-laden statement. For the latter is concerned with the erotic and other rasas, whereas what is meant here is the sweetness of the very words themselves. Now, the second question that he deals with is the way in which this enjoyable quality or rasa is achieved. Dandin says that this can be achieved by keeping words together in such a manner that they sound similar to our ears. Dandin says, when one word is experienced as similar to another, by reason of this or that sound, we have what is called proximity of words. This conveys rasa. Vadijankhala's commentary on this will further explains Dandin's view. Vadijankhala says that the two devices by which this quality can be achieved include alliteration and the proximity of similar words. Vadijankhala observes, similar sounding words, when they are placed in proximity, can generate rasa in poetry, since their proximity will appear sweet. It is this proximity of similar wording sounds that is called rasa, and it is held in high esteem by Southerners. Now, the second use of the word rasa by Dandin in Kavyadarsha. Dandin says that the word rasa can also be used to refer to the figurative deviation of speech. Dandin is of the view that plain speech or report does not make poetry. Such a speech will be bereft of rasa or sweetness. For him, what makes a piece of writing a literary artifact is the figurative deviation of speech. According to him, the expression, "Hey maiden, why don't you love me who loves you a lot," is gramya or uncouth, as it explicitly expresses a man's desire for a woman. For him, this is devoid of rasa or attractiveness. But on the other hand, if we say, the god of love, that cruel person is pitiless to me, but he holds no grudge to you, my pretty-eyed lass, then the same sense is sophisticated and it generates rasa. This appears striking to the readers. Finally, we will come to the three figures of speech which Dandin considers to have the ability to exude aesthetic emotion. These three figures of speech are same as the ones that Bhamaha lists. These include prayaha or affectionate utterance, rasavat or rasa-laden, and urjasvin or haughty utterance. An affectionate utterance, Dandin says, is an expression of heightened affection. The following is an example of prayaha or affectionate utterance that Dandin cites. The moon, the sun, the wind, the earth, the sky, the sacrificer, fire and water, who are we to bypass all your forms, Lord, and see you in your very person? These words are spoken by King Ratnavarman upon seeing Lord Shiva in front of him. The figure of speech called Rasavat or Rasa laden is a statement beautified by the presence of a rasa. The example that Dandin cites is the statement where the erotic emotion is portrayed. The woman I thought was dead and hoped to rejoin by taking my own life. Here she stands, my Avanti. How could I, while still alive, have gotten this woman back? Vadijankala's observation is of particular importance in this context. He says all these emotions need to be properly heightened to be manifested as rasa. Vadijankala observes, what the author means is this: desire that remains unintensified, existing through the inner principle and having the nature of a particular mental formation will be unmanifest. In this state, it is called an emotion, and that is why emotion is described as purely mental transformation and hence unmanifest. The same emotion, when stimulated, becomes manifest through some reaction, understood as the verbal or other register of acting. At that point, it turns into what is called rasa. This is why it has been said that it is the emotions once made manifest that receive the name rasa. In this section on rasa laden or rasavat, Dandin also shows the examples of statements which are laden with other rasas. Finally, Dandin cites the example of the haughty expression. What Dandin quotes as an example of Urjaswin is the speech of a prideful man who frees an enemy seized in the battle. The following is the verse quoted by Dandin. Do not fear, I'll take vengeance for your enemies. My sword would never fall upon an enemy in retreat. Although the idea of rasa was an important point of discussion in Nāṭyaśāstra and was well known to literary critics from Bhāmaha onwards, none of the literary theoreticians until Udbhaṭa considered it to be a criterion for literariness or an independent category. For them, rasa was clearly subordinate to and therefore easily subsumed under a larger discourse on figures. It did not constitute the heart of literariness. This is what Pollock says. In Udbhaṭa's critical corpus also, the idea of rasa largely remains as a figure of speech. By adding quiescent or samahita to the already existing categories of prayaha or the affectionate utterance, rasavat or rasa laden, and urjaswin or the haughty expression, Udbhaṭa increases the number of rasa related figures from 3 to 4. It is important to note that Udbhaṭa is not merely increasing the number of rasa related figures, rather he also radically redefines these figures. In Udbhaṭa's theory, affectionate utterance or prayaha is clearly an intimation of a bhava which is not properly developed into the form of a rasa. According to Udbhaṭa, any bhava can be called prayas, for affection is used to cover all the bhavas. Udbhaṭa says poetry which is composed so as to contain the indications of the bhavas like riti etc. by means of anubhavas etc. is said to contain prayas. Since we have already familiarized ourselves with the examples of this figure of speech, I do not intend to cite a verse here. The thing that we particularly need to keep in our mind here is that in prayas, the emotion remains at the level of bhava, they are not fully developed. Now what about rasa laden statement or rasavat? In the case of rasavat, the emotions are fully developed and are clearly manifest. He also mentions the components conducive for the production of rasa, namely vibhava or foundational factor, anubhava or stimulant factor, vyabhichari bhava or transitory emotion, sthayi bhava or stable emotion, and swashabda or proper name. Anandavarthana and Shankuka criticizes Udbhaṭa for incorporating the proper name of rasas as one of the causes of the production of rasa. According to Anandavarthana, mere names of rasas like Shringara or Hasya cannot generate rasa. Even in instances where the name of the rasa is mentioned, rasa is generated not because of the proper name of the rasa, but because of the presence of vibhavas etc. The last rasa related figure of speech that Udbhaṭa mentions is Urjaswin. Udbhata transforms haughty declaration or urjasvin into an utterance marked by social impropriety, and hence reconceived it as the semblance of rasa. This is a point of debate between Kundaka and Udbhata. The example given by Udbhata for urjasvin is Shiva's indecorous advance towards Parvati before their marriage. Udbhata's argument is that urjasvin, or the indecorous representation of rasas and bhavas, is a figure of speech. Kundaka does not subscribe to Udbhata's view that urjasvin is an alangara, since it tampers with the propriety of the period. Kundaka observes that rasa, bhavas, etc., that are bound together in an improper or anaujitya fashion not only impede the improvement of rasa but also spoil it altogether. He asks how a rasa marred by impropriety can shine forth as an ornament. According to Udbhata, urjasvin will always result in rasabhasa or semblance of rasa. Rasabhasa is that situation wherein a particular rasa fails to come into being, despite the presence of all the components congenial for its production, because the emotion is presented in an indecorous manner or is directed towards an improper object. According to Udbhata, any sentiment or feeling that is developed in an improper and objectionable manner is called rasabhasa or bhavabhasa. A classic example of rasabhasa that Abhinavagupta cites in his commentary on Anandavarthana's Dhvanyaloka is Ravana's love for Sita. According to Abhinavagupta, Sita being another man's wife and a divine being, Ravana's advances towards Sita are highly improper and do not generate Shringara rasa, although Ravana does everything that one is supposed to do to express the aesthetic emotion of the erotic. Abhinavagupta says, rasa appears when a stable state of mind or chittavritti constantly directed towards a proper object is aesthetically relished. The improper variety of rasa or bhava appears when either of them is directed towards an improper object, as when Ravana's love is directed towards Sita. It is called semblance of rasa because the elements required for the generation of rasa fail to produce that particular rasa. All that is seen is mere shadow of rasa, not rasa per se. The final contribution of Udbhata is his redefinition of the idea of samahita. It was an ornament that Bhamaha and Dandin had not even thought of as pertaining to the realm of affect. In the critical framework of Bhamaha and Dandin, samahita means the description of a happy coincidence. Udbhata completely changed the definition and brought it into connection with rasa. For Udbhata, samahita refers to a passage concerned with the cessation of rasa, bhava or their improper varieties in such a way that there is no trace of a new anubhava. Now, it's time to wrap up the class. Let's take a look at all the major concepts that we discussed in this lecture. Although the idea of rasa was an important point of discussion in Nāṭyaśāstra and was well known to literary critics from Bhamaha onwards, none of the literary theoreticians until Udbhata considered it to be a criterion of literariness or an independent category. For them, rasa was clearly subordinate to and therefore easily subsumed under a large discourse on figures. It did not constitute the very soul of literariness. Bhamaha subsumed the idea of rasa under three verbal expressions of emotions such as rasavat or rasa-laden expression, prayaha or affectionate utterance, and urjasvin or haughty declaration. Like Bhamaha before him, Dandin also reserved no special category for rasa other than that of figuration. In Kavyadarsha, the idea of rasa is used in two different senses. First, as a general term for any deviant linguistic expression. Secondly, to denote any poetic expression that is soothing to the ear. And thirdly, as a technical term for various instances of affective expressions such as rasavat, prayaha and urjasvin. In Udbhata's critical corpus also, The idea of rasa largely remains as a figure of speech. By adding quiescent or samahita to the already existing categories of prayaha or the affectionate utterance, rasavat or rasa laden, and urjaswin or the haughty expression, Udbhata increases the number of rasa related figures from 3 to 4. He also mentions the components conducive for the production of rasa, namely vibhava, anubhava, vyabhijari bhava, and finally swashabda or the proper term. I hope you have understood all the major lessons that we discussed in this class. Thank you.